Let me just start by saying welcome to everybody. This is our latest installment of our Power Lunch. We've done several of these, mostly with alumni from our program, the Manhattanville Sport Business Management Program. We had Christine Sarusco of Learfield, Shane Bell from West Point, Devon Garden from the NBA, Carla Chalice with Major League Baseball. And, it's also great to see, I saw the list previous to coming on, a lot of our alumni have signed up for this. So welcome, and please stay in touch with us. Let us know what you're up to, but it's also great to see them. I'm sure it brings a smile to a lot of the adjuncts, both former and present, who are on the call here today. So with that said, let me just introduce my colleagues who were kind enough to help me set this up. Dr. Laura Persky, who runs our show, and thank her for her continued support, and Dominique, who is obviously Dominique Mason, who does all of the dirty work, and appreciate everything she does for us. So also the guy with the kind of weird smile, Mark, my pal Mark Jeffers, who is chairman of our advisory board. We have a sensational advisory board, and before I go any farther, I do feel I need to explain that Barry Wilner, who was intending to do this with us, and he will do it at some point, could not do it today. He is sick. He's been hospitalized. So if you are a praying person, I would just suggest or recommend that you do that for Barry, because he's a good guy and we miss him. So let's put that behind us. We'll get Barry on hopefully soon, but we do really appreciate this gentleman coming on with us today, because we could spend a couple hours with him. So let's just get right into it. And before I go any farther on that, I do also want to share my condolences, because Jimmy lost your mom a few months ago, and just wanted to share my condolences on that as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And I didn't know Barry was not doing well. So my thoughts and prayers are with Barry.
Yeah, Barry is obviously, everybody in the NFL knows Barry, and Barry is the senior NFL writer for the Associated Press. He is the guy, when the Super Bowl ends and they go into the media room, everybody knows that Barry, as the senior statesman, gets the first question. So, and he's been teaching for us for quite some time. He's a good guy. I think he's going to be fine, but he definitely couldn't do it today. So thank you for that. Jim, let's talk about the Rooneys. Let's start with your unbelievable family heritage and the things that your father and your grandfather have done, and obviously which led to the book.
Sure. So, like so many families, my family immigrated, and we came from Ireland, and many years ago, actually, a gentleman named James Rooney left Ireland in 1845 during the Great Famine and went to Canada, worked there for a while, and then lost his job there. He was an iron worker, and went back to Wales, in Great Britain. And then his son, whose name was Art Rooney, came to America. He had a son named Dan Rooney. Then that guy had a son named Art Rooney, who started the Steelers. So this trek started in during the Great Famine, when so many people left Ireland and went back and forth across the ocean, which I think is a little bit unique, and ended up in Pittsburgh because they were all originally iron workers. And my grandfather, Art, who started the Steelers, always talks about that, he went into the mill for one day, and he was a pretty good athlete, and he was a fairly tough guy. He was a boxer, but he said, he just realized in a half an hour he could not spend his life working in a mill, that it was just, the work there was so hard. And, that's how so many people made it, and helped build our country. And so that was the beginning experience, but we got into the sports business because being a mill worker was too tough for him.
Yeah, well, that's tough work for sure. And so your Art would be your grandfather.
Art was my grandfather, correct?
Right.
Yep.
And he bought the Steelers, or literally started the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the original teams, right?
founded the Steelers in 1933.
Wow.
So he had a semi-pro team with his brothers Dan, who became a Benedictine priest, and Jim, who the team was named after. They were called the James P. Rooneys, and talk about illegal campaigning. The reason they were the James P. Rooneys is Uncle Jim was running for the state Senate, and so they named the team after him to give him some more recognition. And then the next year we went into about 4 years later, we went into the NFL. And the year before we went into the NFL, we won the championship of this semi-pro league in Pittsburgh. And then we didn't win another playoff game for 40 years. So I always say they should have kept the name Jim Rooney. They might have had a little more success.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you could have much more success than the Steelers franchise has had. And in fact, this is one of the preeminent franchises in all of sports. And let's talk about that, because it just seems like, obviously, those of us who, I apologize, aren't Steeler fans have great admiration and respect for the way the Steelers do their business. And I think a lot of that has to do with your dad. And the fact that if I go to a game in, doesn't matter where, anywhere, there's, there are sometimes more Steelers fans there than there are of the team that they're playing. So you have quite the following and quite the business model. But at the end of the day, that always comes down to people and management, I think. So your dad, was doing a lot of things right, I think.
Yeah. So, and I hope I'm not getting you too off course, but let me stay back one more response, and then jump into a little bit more modern times. But when you look at the Rooneys, the Maras, the Hallises and McCaskies who own the Bears, the Maras obviously own the Giants, for folks that don't know. Burt Bell's family that got out of the business for a while, and the Bidwells that own the Cardinals. These were our family businesses, and we started football. It would be like starting a lacrosse team today, maybe, where there's a lot of belief and a lot of awareness in the sport, but you had no idea if it would make it, and they all lost a lot of money over a lot of years before the NFL really took off. But I think some of the core ethos that my father took and I think expanded upon, were built in this idea of how do you take care of the family? How do you feed them? And my grandfather was a great sort of promoter, and why they brought him in was not very good at managing. And so the Steelers would have some successes and have some big games with maybe we played the Giants or later the Browns, where we'd get a big gate, and then he might have 2 boxing matches that year, but they would go months without any real revenue for the businesses and the family. And so my father grew up in that environment, and I think it really drove this idea of having a business plan, having tried and true business practices, financing that made sense over more than just what's the next event going to be.
Okay. Did we lose him?
I'm still here.
Okay.
All right. No, I have a question, Dave, if I may.
Well, I don't know. You got to pay first, Mark, but go ahead.
Well, I know, but because sports business, and Jim, we've talked about this in the past, is often tied to relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about that strong relationship that Dan had with Coach Chuck Noll? Because that was really a special relationship.
Yeah. So my father said, you have these 5 or 6 families, start these teams. My father really gets in and says, we need to run this more like a business, goes to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, gets his degree in business and economics, comes out, builds a business plan, and realizes he needs a management team. There's a whole host of folks we can talk to maybe in other questions, but so brings this team together. My grandfather keeps hiring the coaches. He wants his hand in the coaching. So he gets a recommendation from Vince Lombardi. And, obviously Vince Lombardi was a great coach, and both my father and grandfather were close to him, but there was no process involved. They didn't do any, there's very little interviewing, no evaluation, all of those things. It was just, Vince said this was a good guy, let's hire him. And my father always says that was the last point he ever let my grandfather sort of go on this sort of whim or intuition. And so he goes through a very detailed process where he actually offered the job to Joe Paterno, the coach at Penn State, and Paterno turned us down. And so he hires this young defensive coordinator who had worked under Don Shula for just 2 seasons, named Chuck Noll. And Chuck Noll was a great teacher, first and foremost. And I think that's the most essential quality that a coach needs is he needs to be able to develop people. And Chuck had that. He had the best clarity of purpose. I mean, you know, clearly I'm not a Patriots fan, but you know, it was like Belichick. His clarity of purpose was so central around, look, I'm about winning. It didn't mean that, you know, it was win at all cost, but it was, we shouldn't be focusing on things that aren't going to support winning. And so I think he spoke to belief my dad had of the Steelers being very good, but he really helped coach my dad in the way, even though they're the same age, in seeing that, you know, all these ideas you have and the way you're doing it on the business side are just as essential on the football side, that there has to be a plan, there has to be a capacity to develop, and then there has to be a commitment to execution. And then I would say the fourth thing that my father always had, but that Chuck shared with him, was this idea of playing the long game. You know, that you aren't successful overnight, and if you have some success, it's not going to maintain itself just because you've had it.
Yeah, interesting. And before we go on, I'm not going to. We will be taking questions, but I would prefer if you would put them in the chat. That way we can manage it. We've all been on a lot of these calls, and it can get kind of, kind of crazy. But if you would put your question in the chat, and for somebody who gives the best question in the chat, I will provide a free copy of his book. We'll do it, Jim, on our end. But I do want to talk about the book because the
Give
book
me an address and I'll sign it for them.
All right, there you go. All right.
Wow.
It's Dave Terrell. No, it's so
I don't know. Mark's already saying his questions are better than yours.
well, you know, he
Now,
always
don't Jim, don't get me in trouble already.
So this book, I mean, first of all, congratulations. I mean, you're honoring the legacy of your father. And now we're talking about this we're coming into a Father's Day weekend. So, and to all the dads out there, I wish you happy Father's Day. But, you know, but the forward alone is worth the price of this book. The forward is written by, and Jim, forgive me, but I always have to explain because I feel like I'm getting older and some of these people are so young, they might not know. But it was written by a guy by the name of Mean Joe Green, one of the greatest players to play the game, defensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Hall of Famer. And that forward, just reading that, just brings a tear to your eye. But the respect that he had for your father, well, you tell the story. We turned him down for a coaching job, but it was just amazing.
Well, Joe was, you know, talking about Chuck, you know, the two most important people in terms of the Steelers becoming winners are Joe Green and Chuck Noll. And Chuck did it with teaching and with clarity of purpose. You know, Joe was much more emotional as he describes himself in the book. And Joe had a really high standard, and you need a captain that will set an expectation that, you know, and is willing to confront teammates. And Joe had that. You know, Joe scared more than his share of rookies when they were sort of messing around or thinking things were easy, etc. But he also had this quality, sort of once you achieved the sort of Joe Green stamp of approval, he created what Mel Blount, another one of our great players, called brotherly love. And he said, you know, we had a greater sense of brotherly love in our locker room than any other locker room I'd ever been a part of. And Joe, you know, really led a way of saying, look, our expectation is to win championships. We don't let down on the expectation, but we also look out for each other's families. You know, they really built a bond that was, I guess, consistent with some philosophies my grandfather had, 30 years before when he was an athlete, and it just really fit well. So Joe had that and brought that to our culture, and it was something I think my grandfather always tried to do, but wasn't the operator, and you need the operating capacity, but on the team, this idea of the highest standards were also, really showing love to the man next to you, and that was so essential. And he saw my dad as I would say a very principled leader, and that his view of love, and this is not a word you hear in business a lot, but was, love and forgiveness were parts of what my father, brought. And there was high expectations. My father was a tough negotiator, but he also showed these qualities. And when he had someone who was able to express them with maybe more expressive emotion, and in a way, frankly, a black man could to a large group of other black players, it created this. But Joe saw that my father really embraced that, encouraged that, helped build that, and it created this sense of culture between the top of the organization and the players that, again, I think is rare, but created an alignment that everyone was able to carry so many of the same values. I'm not going to tell you people weren't upset about their contracts, or players didn't complain that practice was too hard or too hot, but for the most part, you really had this mindset that was aligned between my father, Chuck Noll, Joe Green, and it set out this effectiveness that Joe had so much respect that 20 years later, as an assistant coach, we interviewed Joe as for the head coaching position when Chuck retires. And my father calls Joe in and says, "Hey, we're going to give it to this other guy named Bill Cowher, who ends up being a Hall of Fame coach." But Joe, I just didn't think, I think that Bill could help the organization the way I think it needs to grow right now. And not a whole lot of people told Joe Green, as you said, his nickname was Mean Joe Green, no. And Joe said, it was one of the few times in his life where he was rejected, and gained appreciation for the person that said that no, because he had that respect for my father. My father walked through why he thought Bill was better in the situation. He showed him a degree of respect in letting him down that I think really emphasized what Joe had already believed about this guy and his approach.
Yeah, no, it's really, well, it's very interesting, and you're right, the respect. And I believe when your father, who was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, he asked Joe to introduce him, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That was a special moment.
Yeah, talk about respect at the end of the day. But now talk about, this juxtaposition, at least for me, is very interesting. Of no, you're not ready, you're not the guy. We're hiring this other guy who happens to be white. But then the Rooney Rule really kind of puts us on a tilt, because the Rooney Rule, people, either have comments one way or the other about, wow, it's just, talk about the Rooney Rule, but also not just its effectiveness within the NFL, but also in other sports.
Yeah. So, I've spoken in some forums for a couple hours on the Rooney Rule. So let me try and answer this as efficiently as I can. And if you want to break it into two questions, if you want to jump in halfway, to make it a little more interesting, please do. But one of the reasons Joe had so much respect is my father hired a scout named Bill Nunn back in 1968. It was one of the first times that an African-American man was hired as an NFL scout. And Bill had been critical of my father. My father had sort of put these pronunciations out there, whatever you want to call them, pronouncements, about wanting the Steelers to be a highly integrated team back in the 60s. My father was really, really impacted by Martin Luther King and everything that was going on. And he said, look, the way I can really make a difference is with my own organization. Well, you get 6, 8 years later, and there really wasn't a whole lot of progress. And Bill, who was a sports writer, was really critical. And my father calls him in and says, Bill, I really want to do this. If you think you can help me, come on board. And he hires him on the spot. And from 1968 to 1980, the Steelers draft more players from the HBCUs, historically Black colleges, than any other team in the National Football League. We bring in several Black coaches, scouts, and you have diversity in a way that certainly you had the representation. You had great numbers, but you also saw, the first Black quarterback was named by Chuck Noll in 1974 prior to the start of a season. You had Joe Green, Donnie Shell, and Sam Davis. It was the first time you had 3 Black captains of the Super Bowl championship team. So it was an environment that didn't only have representation, which I think for those of us who believe this is important, that's a first step. But the second step is truly to make inclusion a part of your culture. And you had an environment that and it gets demonstrated when folks are able to achieve, leadership roles, influencing roles that they might not have otherwise. And so you had that experience, and it really sets the Steelers apart. I mean, since that time, the Steelers, and I'm not here to pat myself or my family on the back, but we've won more games, more championships, sent more players to the Hall of Fame than any other team. We're in this relatively small market, up where you guys are in Westchester is probably bigger than the whole city of Pittsburgh. So we're in the 26th largest market, yet we're in the top, 3 to 8 every year in brand affinity, merchandise, television ratings, all of these metrics. And the turning point was not the commitment to diversity. My father had written that in the business plan, but it was when he really invested in and was challenged by someone and took their opinions in and then began to execute. So you had this experience that showed not only were we doing what I think and my father I think thought was the right thing, but it was the best thing. I mean, we outpaced our competition by doing this. So that becomes the ground of why my father becomes the gentleman that the person, but there were only gentleman options at the time, to run the NFL's diversity committee amongst owners. And so then you have what becomes the Rooney Rule. So I don't know I know I've been talking for a while, so if there's more detail you want on the Rooney Rule, please ask me some questions.
Well, this is why we're here. And again, if people have questions, put it in the chat and I will ask the question. We do have somebody who has a question here. Going back to the business model, when your family first started the Steelers, can you go more into depth about what made the business model successful, especially in that time period?
Well, it wasn't.
Yeah.
We were the worst team in football from 1932 to 1970. You think about teams. I mean, you're starting to see the Brooklyn Nets up there winning, but maybe we'll get the Jets to turn around here. But we were looked at how those teams are looked at, and I'm not casting aspersions.
No, you can. I'm a Jets fan. You can cast aspersions all you want.
I cast them every week in the clubhouse, so don't be afraid, Jim. It's okay.
But that was the impression that people had of the Steelers, and It was the decisions that I said, and to give my grandfather his due, he really was. He was a good promoter, and his boxing promotion business fed us I wasn't there, but fed us for 50 years. He understood how to get people to come to an event, but he just wasn't an operator, and he didn't pay attention to the things you need to pay attention to. The nature of the question is the business model. He didn't pay attention to details. He didn't pay attention to finance. He didn't pay attention to a whole host of administrative activities. He fought for, but it really was my father who fought for, and thank goodness Wellington Mara was a good person from the Giants, and they worked to help convince him to share the revenue, because before that, before 1960, you pretty much made your revenue came from your local market, and as I said, we just weren't that good. we lost a lot of money, and we stayed in business fundamentally because my grandfather was a good old fashioned sportsman from the promotion side, but not the best from the operation side. And since then, my father's injections, inputs, whatever we want to call them, the business plan he put together, I think set the gold standard. And I know I'm his son and et cetera, but he really fought on the league level to make sure that there were all the mechanisms, a lot that people don't like and people in New York don't like salary caps and franchise tax, et cetera. But he created the mechanisms that allow small market teams to compete with large market teams. He set a standard in Pittsburgh that was about winning, but winning over the long haul, and that we understood that you treat people well, and that there is a way to have this highest expectation, but really run a culture that allows for a player. You have a standard that no one can be late for a meeting. That has to be a standard, and it gets broken. But when my father was around, and we lived in a different world, and I'm glad that the players have a lot of say that they do these days. But from a team standpoint, there is something about sacrificing for the team, and you never let anyone be late. But my father also, so that's this guiding principle. But what he would do is, now these were subjective decisions he and Chuck made. But if someone's mom had cancer, they would make an exception, and they made very human exceptions, and they became palatable to everyone else who was living up to the standard. So, that sounds, I try to articulate that. I know that sounds maybe a little bit trite, but those decisions are every bit as important as a decision to create a salary cap and have the revenue be shared.
Very, very important. I'm going to ask Ben's question in a second, but I just want to take a second here just to say we do have some alumni here, some former adjuncts, and and also you mentioned, we talked about Boston College a little bit before you got on the call, Jim. We have one of our alum who's a senior administrator out at BC, Liz Brousseau here, and good to see Liz again. She'll be calling you
Go Eagles
sometime soon. No, I'm kidding. I don't. But no. So but BC is a great school, and even though Mark thinks Syracuse is the best, we all know.
Now, be nice.
But no, I mean, so let's have a little fun, because I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes to talk about. And if nobody knows about this, you have to do a little research before I ask this question. We're going to talk about the Immaculate Reception. Not right now, but before Jim leaves, we have to have that conversation. But right now, let's have a little bit of fun. I want to hear the explanation of the Rooney Mara connection. So the Maras, also great owners, and your dad and I think Wellington were friends. I don't know, but at the end of the day, you talk about ownership, and I always rail about this, that ownership is really what's important in sports to have a good franchise. And but the Rooney Maras, there's a connection there, and obviously for those of my wife would appreciate this. Rooney Mara obviously is an actress who has a connection to you, right?
Yeah, Trisha is my cousin's daughter. So I mean, Trisha's my cousin, but so Patricia Rooney Mara is her real name. But yeah, so our families, and I would put the Bidwells who own the Cardinals in the same lot. We were all sort of vagabond sportsmen that spent a lot of time in the gambling world. My grandfather, Wellington's father, Tim, and Charlie Bidwell, grew up before welfare and grew up in these Irish immigrant communities, and kind of did what they could to survive. And my grandfather was a pretty good boxer. That's what kind of got him into sports, and he was a decent sandlot baseball player. He actually did play a little bit of football, and he played football against Fritz Pollard, who was the first Black coach in NFL history back in the 1920s. But so you had these guys sort of grow up, and Charlie Bidwell and Tim Mara knew my father, and they were entrepreneurs. They got into this thing. Some would say they had no other choice. They didn't have the talent to be in any other industry, but they got into this football thing. And there's sort of this joke that my father in Wellington, you never saw them without a blue blazer and khaki pants, but their fathers were the complete opposite. They weren't allowed in country clubs, let alone dress like country club guys. And but my father and Wellington sat next to each other at all the league meetings. John Mara, who's the president of the team, my brother, I still think do that the most. John Mara says, he should be the best owner in the NFL. He sat between Wellington Mara and Dan Rooney, for 20 years growing up, becoming a sports exec. And I think he does a fantastic job. So we all grew up together, and I don't know, I think there's 11 Maras. There's about 50 of them and 45 of us. So Wellington's son, Chris, and my cousin, my uncle Tim, who had Yonkers Raceway, which was a racetrack my grandfather owned.
That's right.
Yep. So we had to split those businesses, but my uncle Tim ran them, and with this relationship, Kathleen and Chris got married. They both went to Boston College, and then they had Katie, who is also an excellent, famous actress and has done great. Two boys, and then Patricia, who everyone knows as Rooney.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
I've lost a lot of money at Yonkers, by the way, Jim, in case you're wondering.
A lot of money. Yeah, buying a hot dog, you lost money. So
my brother John went to Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh. He was clearly the smart guy, and he went up and worked for my uncle Tim. All that stuff became computerized about 15 years ago, and John did all the work putting the computer stuff together. Sorry, that's probably of no interest to anyone else, but
that's all right, because at the end of the day, Boston College is a great school, and I actually was trying to get my daughter to go there. She wound up going to Colgate, which is no slouch either, but
fantastic.
I just love the city of Boston. I hate all their teams, but I love the city of Boston. Sorry, Liz. But before I ask these next two questions, I want to leave some time for this for my last question. But our first question was from, I want to give her credit, Maria Gomez. Ben has a question. Ben Smith, what are your favorite lessons that you learned from your father that you utilize today?
Well, my wife might not agree that I learned it, but I think patience, and it's hard because I spend a lot of my time talking about the Rooney Rule, talking about diversity, working with communities of color and folks who have experiences that are sort of different than the experience I came from. And it is hard to say that look, all the things I saw work well take time, because when someone is struggling or suffering, I would like to see changes in so many things, both in sports and in industry, happen more quickly. But I can't say that I have a good model for that. And I'm not saying that they aren't out there, but what I saw work with my father, was a consistent and persistent dedication to trying to do what he would call the right thing, by being willing to step into really challenging conversations, by not ostracizing people, understanding that people have different views, but consistently, and he did this in Ireland too, consistently inviting them back to the table and always trying to keep dialogue open. That doesn't mean you accept bad behavior or hate speech or any of those things, but to get things done, he really believed it would take a fairly long time to make people change, but if you had the resilience and the persistence, that you could do that, and I think I hope that's the lesson I observed the most. Like I said, my wife might say I'm not near as patient as he was.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And one more question before we get to the fun stuff with the Immaculate Reception. And I just want to state, your respect for your dad and your love for your dad is clear and obvious. And we have a lot in common, because my dad was actually a Golden Gloves boxer who played for Amos Lonzo Stagg at Susquehanna University. So, and those of us who know football know who Stagg is, and those of us who don't, you should look it up. Here's a question. Bowl. That's right, the Stagg Bowl, Division III. The question from Matt Owens is, okay, he says it's pretty apparent that diversity is lacking in the head coaching ranks for all major sports. Given everything that is happening in our country today, how do you see the NFL rectifying this and providing the proper opportunities to a more diverse, and now I got to scroll down, sorry, pool of candidates? Good question, Matt. Okay.
It's a great question, Matt. And I can't say that I am unequivocally hopeful. But I do try to bring hope. I try to be a voice. I think we all need to bring our voices to this. I think the NFL has tried to work on policies. I think the Rooney Rule, there's certainly several of them. There's no silver bullet to race in America and race in industry. But I think, things like the Rooney Rule, where you are proactively looking for candidates that come from different experiences. All of the data shows that if you put them on the slate, and if you put more than one on the slate, you start looking at exponential numbers in terms of minorities being hired. So I mean, that's certainly one tool. Education is clearly a critical tool, both in sports and beyond. But it is frustrating because it's not like it's 1958 here. I mean, we're talking 40 years in, and we're still having some of these problems. I have a friend, he's an African-American civil rights attorney that we do a lot of work together, Jeremy Duru, and people say to him, what would you consider a success for the Rooney Rule or one of these diversity policies? And I think it's a little cynical, but I think it's very wise. He said, when NFL owners start hiring bad Black coaches for the second and third time, where you really see the lack of willingness is that you see a guy go and coach poorly on one team for 5 years. He might go into the announcer's booth for 2 years, and then he gets another job. That has never happened with a minority coach. Yeah. And he says, look, the proof is we're not saying that these rules are going to make the owners better at hiring. We just want to see them treating people from different backgrounds equally. And I can speak at greater length, and maybe we'll do another session sometime.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
With that, but we can talk at great length. The last thing I will say on that point is I do think that the world is changing enough, and there's enough momentum, and it's always 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I think we're raising the steps, and I think you're going to see more minorities, and I also think you're going to see more women as major coaches and even head coaches in football, and I believe in other sports.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. So, listen, I want to respect the time. We have a few minutes. I have to ask you this, and before I let you go, I want to wish you happy Father's Day. Again, everybody say a prayer for Barry. We're going to stay on after Jim leaves, but if you want to stay for a minute to talk about the sport business management program and what we're doing, a lot of you are alums and current students, but if you want to.
Hey, Dave, I want to interrupt for 1 second because I always want to say to Jim, I know he has, we're going to save your time for your question, but first of all, next time we have this power lunch, Jim, let's do it in person.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Absolutely. God, yes.
There you go.
I'm with you.
All yours, Dave.
Where are you guys at? Were you in Manhattanville?
Yeah.
Manhattanville College, located in Purchase, New York, just outside of White Plains. So you can fly into White Plains Airport and be at the college in 5 minutes.
My brother lives in Larchmont.
I'll pick you up at the airport, Jim.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, you take all the glory, Mark. Go ahead. No, so
no. There used to be a direct flight between White Plains and Pittsburgh. I don't think.
I'm taking it. Yeah, I've taken it. When I used to work for the Football Foundation, I used to go out to South Bend. I flew through Pittsburgh. Anyway, let me get to this. This is the fun stuff. And again, for those of you who do not know about the Immaculate Reception, I'm not going to explain it, but this has been called the greatest play in NFL history by NFL Network. And I saw it. Now, Jim, you're younger, so I don't think you actually remember it firsthand. But there's a lot of stories. Obviously, the story about your grandfather in the elevator going down to congratulate the team who we thought had lost, hearing the cheers of the fans. Your father in his suite, hearing the referee call up and this was before review. The referee calls up and John Madden says the referee called to see if there was enough security for them to get out of the stadium if they overturned the call. So the point is, the Pittsburgh Steelers won the play against the Oakland Raiders, which started a great rivalry. And back then, you could not tip the ball twice as an offensive player. There was a crash, Bradshaw throwing a pass. Franco Harris picked it up off the turf catch, ran into the end zone, and scored and just an amazing, unbelievable play. They call it the Immaculate Reception. Please look it up. If you type in immaculate, it will come right up and you can watch the play. But Jim, we got to talk about that. Well, tell me something that we don't know.
Well, so for the audio version of the book, instead of having photos, I did some interviews, and one of the people I interviewed was Franco, and he really tells an interesting version of the story. He tells his perspective. And Franco is the gentleman that caught the ball, Franco Harris. And it was fun because I've never heard him sort of really get into what he was feeling about it. And we kind of talked about being lost in the moment. He ran, grabbed the ball, and then he ran into the locker room because it got so crazy so quickly. And so he tells a good story of, he's made a life off of it and has done so well in so many things. I mean, Franco is one of the best human beings I've ever seen. But he says that, like, all he did was catch the ball, run in the end zone, run to the locker room. I have, my family's experience is unique because everyone has some part of this story. My brothers and sisters, there's a film, and I don't want to sound too obnoxious, patting on the back, but they did a film about my mother and three other of the senior women in the NFL about 2 years ago called A Lifetime of Sundays. And she tells the story of being up there, and all of my sisters are crying because we always lost. I mean, we lost everything before that game, and they thought, we're losing again, and this is the expectation. And my brother Dan was looking down, he was about 10 years old and in tears. And she says, they actually took this out of the movie because of the world we live in, which I'm good with. But she said, CVS probably should have come. Or CYS. I'm shaking Dan, this 10-year-old kid, saying, Dan, Franco has the ball. Franco has the ball. So my memory of that day is I didn't go to the game, but I will never forget. It's the first memory I always say I have of my brother Dan, my mother, and my sisters coming in from the game into the house, and just the smiles they had on their face. I said, even the Super Bowls, there was not that sheer sense of joy that they all had when they came home from the house from that game that day. So it was a special moment.
Yeah, unbelievable. And again, please, if you have never seen that, you should watch it. It's readily available. I do want to respect your time. You said you had a hard stop, and we're going to let you go now, but we will have you back, hopefully in person. Mark can pick you up at the airport, whatever. And we do appreciate your time, Jim, and obviously for all the great info. And I do have a copy of the book and we do have another question, but we're going to let that pass. We'll get another time.
Okay, but get me the name of the person you're giving the book to. Send me their name, and I'll send it to you or Mark, wherever you guys want me to send it, but I'll autograph it for them if they want. Maybe they don't want that. But
you're so kind for doing this on short notice. We appreciate it. And again, for those, Barry Wilner, please say a prayer for Barry. He's got some health issues, but Jim, thank you so much for doing.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Stay well. Good luck.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
And for those of you left, and John, it's great to see some of these names and faces. John Volparian, I love the goatee. You look mean and nasty, which is really, nothing like you. Liz and everybody else. Thank you for our team for coming, and our alumni band and then all you guys. Great to see. John Dargenio. Oh my God, he lives. John, say hello.
What's up, man? How are you guys?
Oh my God.
Thanks for allowing me to drop in here.
So this is for those of you who don't know, John is a former adjunct, and he can still teach again if he'd like to, but he is the longtime athletic director at Siena College, has taught in our program. Gene Doris, on the call. Gene Doris, obviously an adjunct, still active, and you guys have had him, some of you guys, and again, some of you alumni here and current students. I am not going to do the spiel for the program because I don't see anybody new here, but we'll
Dave,
tape something.
There
Yeah.
are a few people new or just curious, so if anyone
good.
wants
Yeah.
to stay on, please
Yeah,
do.
stay on. We'll chat. I mean, we can do it right
Also,
now.
in
Yeah.
the chat feature is Trisha Feliciano's email address and her Calendly link. So
Yep,
if you are
Trisha.
interested in learning more offline without this larger group, please reach out to Trisha or any of us. Thank you. That was amazing, Dave and
Yeah.
team.
No, what a guy. What an interesting story and what an interesting family. And Trisha, thank you for joining us. Trisha's actually fairly new, but she's doing the admissions for us. And Ken, thank you for joining us, another member of our great admissions team. And all you guys here, again, thank you. Here's my only pitch that I'll say about the program. When you see sport management programs rated by certain colleges touting how good they are, there's a reason for that. Because here's my opinion. When you pay to be on a list, it means nothing to me. It's like a who's who. And people join who's who in America. It's baloney, really, because you want me to pay to be on your list. So just look at our alumni, look at our adjunct professors, look at our advisory board, and look at our program and our location, and that sells itself. We're talking about a master's program that has spawned, and helped people get to places that they want to be. And hopefully, again, we're here to help. Mark, myself, Dominique, Laura, our alumni, Liz, Ben, these are all great people, and Dorian, and we're here to help not only, our current students, but also, our alumni and people help each other. Just like I'll call it the Toromeo rule, right? Okay. How's that? Should I write a book? Toromeo rule? That's right.
I'll write the forward, Dave.
I didn't ask you. No, I want somebody who likes me to write the forward, Mark. My son will write the forward. He's on the
Okay.
call. Anyway, thanks, guys. God bless. Again, Barry, please keep him in your prayers. He's a great guy. He couldn't do it today. He's had some health issues, but we're hoping for the best. And again, we appreciate Jim doing this. And thank you all for coming on. Salud.